Welcome to the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show. Today is November 11th, 2021. This is our 78th episode. My name is Andy Z. I'm the host of the show, coming to you from Los Angeles, California.
And I'm Sunsara Taylor. I'm the co-host of the show, and we mean what we say in our name. This is a show about revolution, nothing less. It's about the actual overthrow of the system of capitalism, imperialism that rules over us and the people of the world and is causing so much unnecessary horror and suffering. We take the name of our show from the talk given by the revolutionary leader, Bob Avakian, called BA Speaks Revolution, Nothing Less. And Bob Avakian is a leader like no one else on the planet today, and no one who has ever existed in the history of this country. He has forged a strategy for an actual revolution in this country. He has developed a vision and a concrete framework for a new society. He's written a constitution for the new socialist republic in North America that would replace this nightmare of a system. And he's developed a method and approach that everybody can and needs to take up, a thoroughly scientific approach to understanding and changing the world. And all of this and much more is part of the new synthesis of communism, what we call the new communism. And we base ourselves on this, and we bring this alive every week, and we apply it every week in this show, and we invite you into this process.
Okay, and our show over the last 6 months has had a tremendous amount of urgency to our message, because we've analyzed in a declaration, a call to get organized now for a real revolution, that there is an opportunity that's before us now because of the sharp divide in American society, two countries within one border, that there is a chance that the situation could be ripened where a revolution could actually be made. This is something you'll learn more about as you watch the show. So Sunsara, today's show, we're going to be dealing with three main things. One, the climate crisis, and giving a further report on what happened in Glasgow, Scotland.
The Glasgow Fiasco.
Okay, you're already giving out the punchline, but all right, that's okay.
It's true.
Okay, it's true, but still, okay. So now they know, but laugh again when you hear it the next time if you don't want to scream at the reality of it. We're also going to do a segment on Ahmaud Arbery, the trial that's going on in Georgia. And we want to begin with this. It's kind of a special treat. A member of the Revcoms has written a poem called A Revolutionary Rhyme for This Historic Time. And you're going to see a video with a reading of this poem by Miles Solay with music by Jesse Williams. And I'm not going to say more about it. So watch this video.
A revolution rhyme for this historic time. Some still think it's smart to act a fool with make-believe cool, to mock and stalk and kill each other, using and abusing one another, selling women, slanging dope, chasing money, squashing hope, when what we really need is heart to fight for what is right and know how to overthrow that big-time enemy that keeps us all from being free. This system, with its savage power, keeps us down, makes life sour. To hell with politicians posing as our friends. With them, this nightmare's never gonna end. And the living dead who straight up hate us, twisted fascist zombie brains. Prejudice makes them insane, like orange-head Donald Trump, that woman-hating racist chump. And all those who want us dead are living in constant dread, down on our knees praying while they keep on slaying. The police who slaughter, suffocate and smother, then do it to another and smirk with a vicious grin when we kill each other again. With this shit we're done. There's nothing ever really won. It's time to quit. Revenge, that endless cycle. Kids can't play or ride their bicycle. So let's go for the real solution. Get with the Revcoms, revolution. Get thousands, then millions just like us. Don't let the capitalist powers psych us, get us making bad decisions when there's the science, strategy, and plan, leadership, and vision from, no lie, an old white man. B.A. Bob Avakian. He's for real, not faking it. Revolutionary from the days with the Black Panthers. He's kept on deeper this whole time after. There's a real chance coming to get free because those who rule us are now at each other's throats. But will we dare to make the most of this rare time we're living in? It's harder now to fool us with their talk of democracy for all. Their system needs to fall. We've got the science to school us. Their whole thing's ripping apart. But do we have the heart to rise above this shit and get ourselves fit to do what cries out to be done with so much that could be won? We need to get busy. Make the oppressors dizzy as we get organized and ready, working steady for the hour to bring our power. If you're black or brown or any other color, show that you've got the valor, the heart to fight for what is really right. Don't listen to any mess about going for something less than bringing down this system and the clowns who front for it. They're not fit to rule the earth. Their system's worth less than the foulest trash. We need to smash it, break it apart, heal the scars from living how they've had us. So join with the ones that next street over. No more trying to blast us. Unite with people far and wide. Sisters, brothers, all justice lovers who can be on our side. These capitalist oppressors, cold-blooded aggressors, even with all their guns, the time has come to work so we can put them on the run, fighting together to put an end to all their madness and begin to make a world, a way worth living, a new day, a better way to be, emancipation for humanity.
Over the last several episodes of the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show, we've been covering the climate conference in Glasgow, Scotland. This is a gathering of world leaders sponsored by the United Nations. And this is the last week of the conference. And midway this past weekend, there was a significant protest in Glasgow, Scotland. There were also a few protests in other parts of the world as well, but shamefully, there were no large protests in the United States, which has put more carbon in the atmosphere than any other country. And it must be said that the Glasgow Fiasco was worse than a charade. These world leaders, for all their bullshit that they get it about climate change, what they have done and what they have not done in Glasgow further sets the planet on a collision course with catastrophic global warming, with the stakes nothing short of the survival of billions of people, people with lives, with families, creative potential, who are now condemned by these political representatives of the capitalist imperialist system that rules over the world today to unspeakable misery and death. Indeed, the stakes could be the survival of humanity itself. In a column in the November 10th New York Times, blowhard Thomas Friedman echoes the ruling class leaders at the conference itself. Friedman, after first praising the protesting youth, goes on to argue that it's not just practical to move away from carbon now, and he even advises that you could plant a tree to save the environment or give money to the indigenous environmental groups. He closes his piece with a joke that he says is going around Glasgow. Quote, "Two planets are talking to each other. One looks like a beautiful blue marble and the other a dirty brown ball. What on earth happened to you, the beautiful blue planet?" asks the brown one. "I had Homo sapiens," answers the brown planet. "Don't worry," says the blue planet. "They don't last long." It takes a lot of unbelievably arrogant gall to repeat this when you have just demonstrated that you are part of the problem, but still, the joke is no joke. It's all too real. This week on Revcom.us, there is an article titled "A Reflective Rant. How Many Children Did the Glasgow Fiasco Doom to Die? A Confrontation with Reality." That's really worth your reading. If you have allowed yourself to become numb to the statistics and the predictions of rising seas and temperatures, of refugees fleeing floods and droughts, of the planet on fire, or if you let these huge numbers wash over you because you don't think it will happen to you, this rant tells a story from Time magazine of how climate change is already being lived by hundreds of millions of people, including this from Pakistan, where temperatures reached 124 degrees Fahrenheit this past year. Quote, "It's just after 7 in the morning in a city in central Pakistan, and donkey cart driver Ashan Kasu is already drenched in sweat. For the past 2 hours, the 24-year-old laborer has been hauling jugs of drinking water to local residences. When the water invariably spills from the blue jerry cans, it hits the pavement with an audible hiss and turns to steam. It's hot, he agrees, but that's not an excuse to stop. The heat will only increase as the day wears on, and what choice does he have? Quote, even if it were so hot as if the land were on fire, we would keep working. And he pauses to douse his head with a bucket of water. And while we are on the subject of water, UNICEF, which is a UN agency concerned with children around the world, has estimated that more than 1/3 of the children globally are currently exposed to a situation of not having sufficient water to live healthy lives. In previous weeks on the RNL Show, we have brought alive that there is no solution to the climate crisis and the environmental emergency within the capitalist imperialist system. This is a system with its relentless drive to maximize profit, which can only view the cost of protecting the planet as outside, as external to their bottom line, and more, their vast militaries run on fossil fuels. System change can only be achieved through an actual revolution to overthrow capitalism imperialism. On today's show, we're going to present a few things about the COP26, the Glasgow UN failure of a summit to repair the planet. First, we want to show some of what the young people from around the world had to say at the protests this past weekend in Glasgow. This will then be followed by a short video illustrating a piece from Revcom.us from last August called 1 billion children in poor countries worldwide face extremely high risk from climate change. And last, we're going to play a question and answer from the RNL Show's Talkback Zoom conference last week with Raymond Lotta. But first, let's go to the Glasgow protests.
It is not a secret that COP26 is a failure. It should be obvious that we cannot solve a crisis with the same methods that got us into it in the first place. And more people are starting to realize this. Many are starting to ask themselves, what will it take for the people in power to wake up? But let's be clear, they are already awake. They know exactly what they are doing. They know exactly what priceless values they are sacrificing to maintain business as usual. The leaders are not doing nothing. They are actively creating loopholes and shaping frameworks to benefit themselves and to continue profiting from this destructive system. This is an active choice by the leaders to continue to let the exploitation of people and nature and the destruction of present and future living conditions to take place. A 2-week-long celebration of business as usual and blah, blah, blah.
We emit very little CO2. Very little CO2 emissions, but we are suffering some of the worst impacts. People are dying from floods, disasters like droughts that are drying up people's crops, people's food. Uganda heavily depends on agriculture for food and water. But again, agriculture depends on the natural systems. That means people are left hungry with nothing to eat or nothing to drink.
Last week, my heart was broken by the people inside that COP building, by the world leaders who steal our sacred words and use them to defend and uphold the oppressive systems of capitalism and white supremacy, who tell us the action needed to prevent sea level rise engulfing my ancestral home in Jamaica is impossible or not practical. The antidote to despair is not to run away or ignore the realities of the societal violence around us. It is not to ignore the violence of our siblings on the front lines who experience at the hands of the neocolonial fossil fuel companies. It is not to ignore the hypocrisy of the UK government, the hosts of this conference, who prop up these violent fossil fuel companies with £4 billion of our public money in subsidies. This same government who are trying to approve the Cambo oil field and 39 other oil and gas projects at a time when the IEA and the IPCC have said that we can have no new investment in oil and gas if we want a livable future. This is worse than hypocrisy. It is violence. In the face of this violence and despair, we cannot give up. We cannot be overwhelmed. We must act.
Once the home of the indigenous West Papuans, New Guinea Island has become a colonized land by Indonesia today, having world's largest gold mine owned by a U.S. mining corporation, BP with having their one of the largest LNG gas projects, and palm oil companies destroying our ancient lands. World's third largest lung threatened with extinction are how the people. If I reflect you, our current status, 4.6 billion years of life to just 10 years to prevent irreversible destruction of Earth's ecosystems.
How is it even possible that we have every year more concessions, and how we every year can see more oil platforms being built in the Amazon? It is only possible because there are people financing that. And the same people that are perpetuating this violence on our lands are the same ones having the negotiations over there in that building at COP.
The Philippines is one of the most impacted countries when it comes to the climate crisis. I have witnessed firsthand how two of the costliest typhoons to ever hit the country just last year. Floods reaching the roofs of 2- 3-story buildings, lives and livelihoods erased overnight. On top of this, our President Rodrigo Duterte is cracking down on environmental activism, calling for the massacre of indigenous Lumad peoples, other land and environment defenders, and shutting down climate activists by calling us terrorists. Gloria Capitan, Obilo Bayao, Datu Victor Danyan, all assassinated under the Duterte regime for protesting against destructive coal, mining, and plantation projects in the Philippines. The climate crisis is not an issue, it's an issue of today, not 2050, not 2030. And each second these world leaders delay action towards global mitigation and adaptation condemns billions across the world to an unlivable future.
The UN has found that 1 billion children, which is nearly half of the world's 2.2 billion children, are in extremely high-risk life conditions due to climate change. These children are each facing multiple climate and environmental hazards. However, nearly every single child in the world is at risk from at least one of these hazards. Virtually no child's life will be unaffected, says the executive director of UNICEF, which is the agency that undertook this study. They published the study under the title, "The Climate Crisis is a Child Rights Crisis." This is what they found. 570 million children are highly exposed to coastal or riverine flooding. 400 million children are highly exposed to cyclones. 600 million children are highly exposed to vector-borne diseases. 815 million children are highly exposed to lead pollution. 820 million children are highly exposed to heat waves. 920 million children are highly exposed to water scarcity, and 1 billion children are highly exposed to exceedingly high levels of air pollution. Now, it can be hard to comprehend the gravity of these figures, so let's just look at one. Because of increasing drought, contamination, and other climate-related impacts, 920 million children do not have ready access to clean water for their most basic needs. 920 million children. That's more lives than the entire combined populations of Germany, the US, the UK, Japan, Canada, Italy, France, and Russia. The UNICEF executive director said, "While no child is responsible for rising global temperatures, they will pay the highest costs. And the children from countries least responsible will suffer most of all." According to the data, the top 38 countries with children at risk are all poor countries in Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean region. Of the 25 least at risk, 23 are in Europe. The US, one of the world's top polluters, comes in at 80 in terms of risk to kids. This new report reveals nothing less than the reality that the existing world order is murdering the very future of humanity. As long as the powerful capitalist imperialist countries like the US are exploiting the resources and labor of oppressed countries, these countries' people are condemned to get poorer and sicker, and their environments will be ever more ravaged. The system of capital's imperialism requires this destruction, and there's only one possible way to give these children, and therefore all of humanity, an actual chance at a future worth living, one in which they can become fit caretakers of the environment, to uproot and overthrow this entire system and replace it with a radically different system that works in the interests of all humanity and the planet.
The video we just watched was produced by a new video volunteer with the RNL Show, and I want to give her a special thank you. And I also want to invite other video makers to do the same, to write us and volunteer at the Revcoms at gmail.com. Now next, as I said, we want to play a question and answer from a Zoom forum with Raymond Lotta on the Glasgow conference that speaks in a couple of dimensions to how a new society established after a revolution would deal with the enormous problems of meeting the needs of the people in this new society and doing so in an ecologically sustainable way and a non-exploitive way towards other countries. Earlier in Raymond's presentation, he brought up the Constitution for the New Socialist Republic in North America, authored by Bob Avakian. This is a constitution for a new kind of government, a radically new society to meet not only the needs of the people, but one which fosters widespread engagement and debate among the masses of people, including provisions for dissent and protest. All this to enable masses of people to play a conscious role in a radically different process. As envisioned by Bob Avakian, this radically new kind of state would be, people would be empowered to struggle through how to remake society in the world to overcome all forms of exploitation and oppression. The question asked of Raymond Lotta was this: after the revolution, and here the questioner was referring to the early period after a revolution had been won and the new state power formed, they posed this: the new socialist society would no longer rely on cheap raw materials and goods, including minerals and the raw materials that are required to make solar panels, batteries, and other forms of renewable energy. Under the old system, these raw materials and goods had been obtained through global supply chains rooted in the super exploitation of poorer countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America by the former imperialist USA. The question then was, how would these new principles of not exploiting the people and the environment around the world complicate the ability for the new socialist society in North America to make the necessary rapid shift to renewable energy? So let's go to Raymond's answer and my comment.
Well, we don't know what the situation will be, after the coming to power, the point about, the tremendous destruction and dislocation that will be caused by the ruling class, seeking to hold on to power and to punish, and create as much, difficulty for any new socialist, society to be functioning within. We're going to have to, treat this as a global problem. The reconstruction of this society and the restructuring of this society has to be carried out, according to these principles of socialist sustainable development. So let's take that example of lithium and cobalt for solar, batteries. You're going to have to be making, actual decisions that maybe there has to be more emphasis on solar power, on geothermal power. In other words, it's not going to be proceeding from what is the most cost-effective in the short run, but what is going to be, allowing you to be relating to the rest of the world in a qualitatively different way, and as I said, relating to the environment. Those two radical ruptures, not the only ones, but these two in terms of the socialist economic transformation that's called for. So yeah, you're going to have what the energy mix will look like, a renewable energy mix will look like, will be conditioned by these very factors that the questioner is putting before you. That if rare earth minerals are found only in certain parts of the world, that and the ways in which they have been mined and the ways in which they have been incorporated into the economies of the advanced capitalist countries has proceeded a certain way, that can no longer be the case. And that's going to impact on, as I said, the renewable energy mix that you're striving to create to get away from fossil fuels. So that might mean that you can't do solar power in exactly the way you would want to do it in the abstract. You're going to be taking all those different factors into account. And then your relations, your economic relations with the rest of the world, your trade relations are going to be qualitatively different. It's not going to be based on exploitation and, unequal, and these unequal relations. So, there's no textbook answer to that question, but I'm trying to give you some of the criteria and some of the factors that'll be, influencing, those decisions that you're making. And again, we have to get back to that earlier point. We're not going to have the same level of consumption that we have in this society now. In other words, all the need for those raw materials is not going to be the same. It's been, pointed out, and, that if the entire world had the standard of living, the level of consumption of the United States, you would need 5 Earths. Well, that Earth is now under threat, and you can't proceed on the basis of what exists today. So I'm just trying to, illustrate, how you would be, articulating an approach to this, taking these different elements, into account. So there's no simple answer to that question, but there is an approach that has to be taken that would be proceeding in the way that I'm discussing.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on one aspect of what you said about different trade relations. One thing is, when there is a revolution in the most powerful imperialist country in the world today, yes, it's got a rival in China, but the most powerful imperialist country in the world today and in human history, it's going to change a lot of things in the world. I don't think this is this is going to inspire people all around the planet. We don't know what will come of such a revolution in terms of how other countries, what they do there. There'll still be a lot of imperialism and capitalism in the world. But there will be a need for the new socialist state, the Socialist Republic in North America, to enter into trade agreements. But we'll do it under different principles, the principles that are outlined and indicated in that Constitution. There are ways that we will be able to trade with people on a fair and equitable basis. And there will be other countries that possibly have had revolutions, certainly in the it's south of the United States. And there'll be, one of the things that people have to do is sort of free their imaginations to imagine a different world and different principles. And this could lead to a whole different way that we go at this, including, however, it does have to be said that there'll be a lot of destruction. There's going to be a difficult situation at first. There's no reason, as Bob Avakian said, for us to say, day 2, everybody's going to the amusement park. That's not what it's going to be. There's going to be destruction. But imagine this, and this is something he said, and I encourage you again to watch the segment from his question and answer in a talk he gave, why we need an actual revolution, how revolution could really be made, how we could really make a revolution, 2018 talk that was excerpted in the last show of the RNL show, number 76. But, this is going to be a whole different situation. And but think about this, he makes this point. There's all these youth out there right now who have no productive way to be part of society. They're locked out of it. This is at the bottom of society and in the prisons. There's all kinds of middle-class kids or kids who've been tracked into colleges, junior colleges, Ivy League colleges, graduate schools, who are doing work that's just feeding the machine, advertising, promotion, working on some of the more poisonous aspects of the internet. All of this creativity will be mustered in a different socially useful way. And there'll be a struggle in society where the revolutionaries, who will be very influential in society, having led people to win a revolution, will be tapping into that creativity under a new economic system that we could then rebuild society in a different way that it's been built today. So what we will lose through the destruction of a revolution, we could rapidly regain through unleashing the creativity and productive capacity of the masses of people. I just want to add a further comment. You know, moving to a country with an economy where ecological sustainability is required by law in the Constitution, there's going to be a whole other way people are going to be living. Raymond Lotta made the point that we can't just have a transportation system that depends on everyone having one or more cars. We're going to need alternative modes of transportation, which we'll have to develop. But think about it. This is going to involve an awful lot of struggle in society. And the new communism is not going to rely on force marching people to the new future, but with a whole different method and approach to leading society. A few episodes back, I read from Bob Avakian's New Year's statement, where he said of the Constitution for a new socialist republic that in no other actual or proposed founding or guiding document of any government is there anything like not only the protection, but the provision for dissent and intellectual and cultural ferment that is embodied in this Constitution. And more, on the basis of a radically new and different economy, there will be the promotion through the educational system and in society as a whole of an approach that will enable people to pursue the truth wherever it leads with the spirit of critical thinking and scientific curiosity, and in this way to continually learn about the world and be better able to contribute to changing it in accordance with the fundamental interests of humanity. The revolutionary communists will have to win people to a new way of living. There will be protests to go back to the old way. And we will have to have big and small debates on the walls and in the schools and in the public squares to win people to a whole different ethos and a whole different way of living, serving the people and emancipating humanity, and not looking out for self and hoarding all I can for me. So I just wanted to say before wrapping up this part of the segment, get into the Constitution for a new socialist republic in North America. So that concludes our segment on the Glasgow conference for this episode of the RNL Show. But related to the comments I just made, we want to show a clip from Bob Avakian of a question and an answer that he gave following his 2018 speech, why we need an actual revolution and how we could really make a revolution. The question put to him, which you'll hear, is after the revolution, how will we use peaceful tactics to maintain power? Now, we're just going to show a portion of Bob Avakian's answer, but we'll link to the whole answer in the description below. So watch this.
It's a pleasure meeting you. I guess my question, I'll keep it short, but if and when we achieve a revolution, how will we use peaceful tactics to maintain power? And how do we organize and navigate through people on different levels of the spectrum, depending on what their belief system is, and what kind of methods would we be using to interact with them? And I guess that goes into also what would our judicial system look like, as far as would there be jails and an army, or yeah. So I guess it's like at the how and into how we would implement this revolution in a safe and conducive way.
Okay, well, first of all, a lot of the things that you raise are spoken to in the Constitution for the new Socialist Republic in North America. So I would urge that you get a hold of that and read it, you know, because you're raising very important things. All those are real questions, and they are spoken to there pretty concretely. So that's one thing I would say, is it'd be good to really dig into that. You said you make your question short. I can't promise I'll make the answer short, but maybe I'll try to make it a little shorter than before. certain institutions you raise, like would there be an army? Yes, you need an army. You need a revolutionary army to defend the revolution, because you're still going to have other people out there in the world, who don't like what you represent. It's not like you make a revolution in, say, in this country, and then all the people who are, part of the oppressive systems in other parts of the world say, Russia or China, whatever, say, oh, great. Look, they're going to make a society without exploitation and oppression. Let's wish them well and hope they succeed. No, they're going to do everything they can to undermine what you're trying to do, because, it goes against what they believe in, but also it's a very infectious example for all the people that they're exploiting and oppressing, who might want to do the same thing. So they're going to want to defame it, they're going to want to slander it, and they're going to want to crush it. So you have to have an army to defend this. And also, look, let's be real. Let's say we succeed with the revolution here. Not everybody from the old society is going to be so happy about that. There are going to be people who've been overthrown, people who've been exploiting other people, who are going to want to try to get rid of the system just as much as those other people in other parts of the world. So you have to have an army to defend the revolution, the army which will be brought forward in the process of making the revolution and overthrowing the system. But the nature and the principles of that army have to be completely different than the kind of army that we have under this system. And that's what I was getting at when I talked about, it's a true statement that any army is a reflection of the society or the system that it's fighting for. We have to have some of this is spelled out in the Constitution, like the army of the society we're talking about has to be, one that's not only protecting the revolution, but also protecting the rights of the people, even the rights of the people to dissent and protest against what's happening in the socialist society, for if people disagree with it. So, and that takes work, okay? Look, let's be honest. Just ask yourself, how do you feel about, let's say we make a revolution. You've seen a lot of people that you love have suffered terribly under the old system, and a lot of your comrades in arms, people you were in the trenches with, have been killed, have been tortured, everything by these monsters that we're overthrowing. We finally succeed in the revolution. We have a new society, a new government, new institutions, and some people come along and say, I don't like the way you're doing this, and I don't like the way you're doing that, and I thought it was better in the old way, and I don't have everything I had. I can't get my designer coffee the way I used to. And my glass of wine that I wanted to have at 6 o'clock every day, I can't, and like I said before, you feel like saying, shut the fuck up, okay? Or else we're gonna beat you over the head, but you can't do that. See, and how hard is that? Okay, think about it. That's another reason why you need leadership, because if you don't have the view of where we're going in a really far-sighted way, you're going to give in to that. It's going to be very hard. And so this is spelled out in the Constitution for the new socialist republic, that people have the right to raise those things. They have a right to organize and protest against what you're doing, and the armed forces and the police have to protect people's right to do that, and not do what they do now and go beat them over the head, and say, what rights? You don't have any rights. No. So, and this is going to be hard. It's going to be, and that's why you need organization, but most of all, you need the right outlook. Why do we do that? Because we want to get somewhere that's beyond all this stuff. And if we turn into new oppressors in the name of getting rid of oppression, then it's just going to go back to the way it was. And that's a hard contradiction to handle, because you can't let the old system come back. If people actually organize to, look, if we go all through all this and have a revolution, and then people try to organize an armed uprising to overthrow us, we're going to smash them, okay? I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. That's the way it is, okay? We didn't go through all this just so you could overthrow us. That's not fair. You overthrew us. Well, tough shit, okay? Because this is serious business. It's not a game, okay? But otherwise you're not serious. If you let people rise up in arms against you after you've gone through everything you've gone through, you're not serious. But if people want to protest and resist, and they want to say, they should be done a different way, and so on. That has to be allowed, and you have to protect people's right to do that, even when it really makes you mad. And that's another reason why you have to have the right leadership and the right science to know that if we don't do that, we're not going to get beyond this whole thing in human society where some people are oppressing others. And that's what we want to do. We want to get beyond all that, where there, yes, can be a rich flowering of human beings in all kind of diverse ways, but they're united in working together for the overall good. That's what we want to get to. Not, well, you had your chance, now it's our turn to oppress other people, or, you did terrible things. Look, we're going to prevent them from doing terrible things, but that's different than becoming new oppressors.
November 5th marked the opening of the very important trial of 3 white men who hunted and killed Ahmaud Arbery, a 25-year-old black man, in February of 2020 in Glynn County, Georgia. Father and son, Gregory and Travis McMichael, and their neighbor, William Bryan, faced charges of murder, aggravated assault, false imprisonment, and attempt to commit false imprisonment. Ahmaud was chased and murdered in broad daylight by these racist vigilantes. He was vilified by cops and prosecutors who lied about and covered up the circumstances of his death. Now, his killers are using a law designed to protect slave catchers and used for decades as a defense of lynching in a trial overseen by a judge who has allowed a virtually all-white jury to decide their case. The killing of Ahmaud Arbery was a continuation of a long, ugly history in this country. Between 1882 and 1968, there were 4,743 lynchings in the U.S., according to the NAACP. Lynchings are so central to what this country is all about that Bob Avakian began his 2003 talk, Revolution, Why It's Necessary, Why It's Possible, and what it's all about, like this.
Back in the day, Bob Dylan began one of his epic songs, Desolation Row, this way. They're selling postcards of the hanging. They're painting my passports brown. I don't know what that second line, they're painting their passports brown, is all about. Someone suggested maybe it's the Nazis and Hitler, because brown was a color associated with him. But what I want to focus on here has to do with the first line. They're selling postcards of the hanging. In the ugly history of this country and all its horrors, selling postcards of the hanging, in particular, selling postcards of the lynchings of black men, was literally a pastime, a kind of social activity in which all too many white people took part for 100 years and more, even after slavery was ended. Take the case of Claude Neal, who was accused of raping and killing a white woman and was lynched in Florida in 1934. Not only did a lynch mob hang him, they mutilated his body in the most horrible and vile way, and parts of his body were taken as souvenirs. And that's not all of it or the worst of it. His lynching was announced in advance, and people came as if it were a picnic. It was even announced in the Associated Press news service and went out around the country. Thousands of people, including many solid citizens, came in this picnic atmosphere. One interesting thing is people on their way to an American Legion convention stopped off to witness the lynching. And some people were angry that they got there too late. You remember the American Legion? That's an organization of veterans formed after World War I who supported every reactionary, aggressive war of plunder and conquest carried out by the American government, including the latest war on Iraq. photographers lined up to take pictures of Claude Neal's body, knowing that if they got just the right angle, they could make a lot of money selling the picture. And yes, from photographs of his mutilated body hanging from a tree, postcards were made and sold.
Yes, this is America. And here's what happened on February 23rd, 2020. Ahmaud Arbery went for a run. He was unarmed, wearing shorts and a t-shirt. He had done nothing wrong. But when the McMichaels saw Ahmaud, they grabbed a shotgun and a .357 Magnum, and they chased after him in their pickup truck like a modern-day lynch mob. Soon their neighbor Brian joined them and filmed. The video shows the McMichaels blocking Ahmaud with their truck, one of them standing in the truck bed with a firearm. Travis McMichael, holding a shotgun, jumped out to confront Arbery, and Arbery was shot twice in his chest and once in his wrist. He died on the pavement. When police arrived, they immediately recognized Gregory McMichael as a fellow pig. He had worked for more than 30 years in the Glynn County Police Department, and so these cops made no arrest. On May 5th, over 2 months later, the video of Arbery's murder became public. Outrage and protest erupted in Brunswick and across the country. On May 7th, the two McMichaels were arrested and charged, about 2.5 months after they murdered Arbery. Brian wasn't arrested for another 2 weeks. Now, this case has finally come to trial. During jury selection, Brian's lawyer complained that middle-aged white men were being discriminated against. In actual fact, black people were removed from the jury at each step of the process. Glynn County is about 26% black, but the jury of 12 people, plus 4 alternates, has only 1 black person on it. The judge acknowledged that there, quote, appears to be intentional discrimination, end quote, against black jurors, but let the trial move forward anyhow. At the opening of the trial, the lawyer for Travis McMichael said that McMichael acted in self-defense. He claimed that McMichael thought Ahmaud Arbery had committed a burglary and that Georgia law gives him the right to carry out a citizen's arrest.
The evidence shows overwhelmingly that Travis McMichael, honestly and lawfully, attempted to detain Ahmaud Arbery according to the law and shot and killed him in self-defense.
According to what law, you might be asking? Good question. That lawyer is referring to Georgia's citizen arrest law that was first passed all the way back in 1863, in the middle of the Civil War. The same year that Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation that abolished slavery in the Confederate States. The law's purpose was to enable white people to hunt down and arrest black people for the, quote, crime of trying to escape, including to join Union forces in the North. In the decades after the Civil War, this citizen's arrest law became a bulwark of Georgia's white supremacist Jim Crow regime and its lynch law. There were more lynchings of black men in Georgia than any other state besides Mississippi. 531 recorded lynchings in Georgia alone. And this is the law being used to defend Arbery's killers. Today, open white supremacy is coming back with a vengeance. It is publicly flaunted, encouraged, and legislated in a way it hasn't been for decades. You can see it in the mobs threatening school boards for teaching about slavery. You can see it concentrated in the vigilante murder of 2 Black Lives Matter protesters and the shooting of a third by Kyle Rittenhouse, who is also on trial right now in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And this is concentrated in the vicious murder of Ahmaud Arbery and the outrageous defense being mounted by his killers. All of these are examples of what Bob Avakian said in 2017.
There is a direct line from the Confederacy to the fascists of today. and a direct connection between their white supremacy, their open disgust and hatred for LGBT people as well as women, their willful rejection of science and the scientific method, their raw America First jingoism and trumpeting of the superiority of Western civilization, and their bellicose wielding of military power, including their expressed willingness and blatant threats to use nuclear weapons to destroy countries.
It is very important that there are protests outside the courthouse in Georgia demanding justice for Ahmaud Arbery. These crimes cannot be met with indifference or resignation. At the same time, it is urgent that growing numbers of people be won to see that only by getting organized for a real revolution and then succeeding in overthrowing this system can we finally put an end to the unbroken chain of oppression and terror against Black people that is as American as apple pie. This is what we all must work tirelessly for, and we must lead people to fight against what's concentrated in this case as part of building up the forces and the strength for this revolution. So with that, we want to take a further look at the history of this country and the legacy of racist vigilante terror. And we want to do this by sharing with you the American crime case number 71, the Colfax Massacre, and the Supreme Court's green light for racist terror.
Here's something to think about. How is it that during the 90 years from the end of Reconstruction to the 1960s, thousands of Black people in the South could be publicly lynched and the federal government not lift a finger to stop the lynchings or punish the perpetrators? It's not like they didn't know what was happening. The National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama, has to date documented 4,400 racial terror lynchings between 1877 and 1950. Historical records show that in 1893, for instance, one lynching occurred in the South every 40 hours, and the count is ongoing. But how were these murders documented? Most of them were announced in advance in local newspapers, openly and proudly. And then, of course, there were the postcards, sold and collected throughout the country so widely that the U.S. Post Office finally tried to ban them in 1908. But did the federal government do anything to stop the century-long reign of terror? Not a chance. Why? There is an answer, and to find it, you need only travel back in time to the years following the Civil War known as Reconstruction, and the tiny town of Colfax, deep in the heart of Louisiana. And from there, head on over to the United States Supreme Court, whose landmark 1876 decision gave the seal of approval to a reign of terror in the South that lasted nearly a century. This was a unique moment in American history, when laws and constitutional amendments were passed granting former slaves the democratic rights of citizenship. As Bob Avakian describes it, quote, "During the brief period of Reconstruction, while the full promise of these rights was never realized, there were significant changes and improvements in the lives of Black people in the South. The right to vote and to hold office, and some of the other constitutional rights that are supposed to apply to citizens of the U.S. were partly, if not fully, realized by the former slaves during Reconstruction. And in fact, some Black people were elected to high office, though never the highest office of governor in a number of southern states." End quote. Along with those rights, laws were passed that made racist terror a federal crime. But from day one, those laws, fought by former slave owners, Confederate veterans, and a significant number of white people in the South, were rarely enforced. In Louisiana, which had been the most brutal of slave states, estimates are that over 1,000 Black people were murdered in racist terror attacks during the 4 years between 1868 and 1872. Then came the sharply contested 1872 election for governor of Louisiana, won by William Pitt Kellogg, a supporter of Reconstruction. Following his victory, a mob, led by the white supremacist Crescent City White League, stormed and occupied the State House in New Orleans, attempting to overthrow the election. Is this starting to sound familiar? Knowing what was coming, African Americans in Colfax, which was the seat of Grant Parish in central Louisiana, took refuge in the courthouse. Then on April 13th, Easter Sunday, they were set upon by 300 White League and KKK members armed with rifles and a cannon. Following a brief gun battle, the freedmen surrendered. Historian Tom Army describes what happened next.
The attackers lined up those who surrendered outside the courthouse and then called each freedman out of line by name. As they came forward, they were shot. Some had their throats slit. The remainder were hanged. 165 freedmen were either killed in the fight or executed. 3 white men were killed in the attack.
Historian Eric Foner described the Colfax Massacre as, quote, the bloodiest single instance of racial carnage in the Reconstruction era, end quote. When no state charges were brought against the murderers, the federal government tried 9 of them under the new civil rights laws with, quote, interfering with people's right and privilege to peaceably assemble together, end quote. Only 3 were convicted, and the case eventually made its way to the Supreme Court in 1875. The case was the United States versus Cruikshank, and in March of 1876, the court threw out the convictions of the 3 murderers on the grounds that the Bill of Rights only protects black people from violations of their rights committed by the federal or state government, not by racist mobs. You heard that right. The United States Supreme Court declared the federal government had no jurisdiction over racist mobs committing mass murder. And with that, the civil rights laws and amendments of the past 10 years were essentially nullified, and the historic attempt by the federal government to grant democratic rights to black people was over. By 1877, the Army was withdrawn from every one of the southern states, and white supremacy was free to rule by terror and murder for decades to come. Truth be told, the complete emancipation and integration of black people into American life was never really the goal of Reconstruction. After all, who would pick the cotton that was so central to the growth of capitalism if the millions of formerly enslaved people were truly free? So sharecropping, essentially a slavery under a new name, became the order of the day. As Bob Avakian explains, quote, real freedom for the former slaves would have enabled them to resist the severe exploitation that was visited upon them, and thus would have made the reintegration of the Southern economy into the larger society much less profitable for the ruling capitalists. So the Ku Klux Klan was unleashed in full force and played a brutal role in defeating and subjugating the freed slaves and progressive whites, often in bloody battles, end quote. And besides, as capitalism flourished and the newly united country expanded west, the Army had other needs to tend to.
That was American Crime number 71, the Colfax Massacre and the Supreme Court's green lighting of racist terror. It was produced by the filmmaker David Zeiger. He is a good friend of the Revolution Nothing Less show. He's produced a number of American Crime segments that we've shared with you. He actually was a guest as well on one of our episodes. And we also encourage you to go to the website, revcom.us, and read the whole American Crime series. It's really very essential to understanding the nature of this country that we live in and why we need a revolution. So with that, we have got to the end of our episode here tonight. Andy?
Yeah, and we exposed tonight the fact that humanity is facing an existential crisis with the environment, and this capitalist imperialist system is doing nothing to solve it. In fact, they're making it worse. And we talked about, too, you did a whole segment on the trial of the Confederate murderers of Ahmaud Arbery. These are just 2 of the 5 stops that we've talked about on this show, 5 things that this system can never reform and 5 things that you care about. And that's why we need you to get busy now working for a revolution. If you care about justice, if you care about humanity, if you care about the planet, you need to get involved with this revolution by spreading this show. This needs to be seen by thousands and tens of thousands of people. That's not going to happen just by us putting it on the internet. We need you to spread this show, to support the show, to involve other people in it, to donate to it financially. And over the next weeks, as we approach the holidays, we want you to go out to friends and family, whoever you see over the holiday season, whether you have a big Thanksgiving Genocide Day holiday or not. We want you to reach out to people and bring them the show and see if you can solicit donations from them, so that this holiday season we raise the kind of funds to do a lot of promotion for the RNL show all over the country and build the audience as part of building a movement for an actual revolution. So with that, I just want to say good night for myself, and we'll see you next Thursday for the RNL Revolution Nothing Less show.